Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And in honor of last week's 47th anniversary of the passing of the king of rock and roll, Mr. Elvis Aaron Presley, at the age of 42 on August 16th, 1977. For today's episode, we're going to go back to June of 1977, take a quick look at Elvis Presley's final album, the monstrous Moody Blue. Now, by the fall of 1976 and the spring of 1977, when Elvis Presley was recording this album, I think it's safe to say that his condition had reached critical mass, and if things weren't going to change and change dramatically, it was quickly becoming too late. Now, that's a term, too late, that I don't really have a lot of use for, to be honest with you. I am steadfast in the belief that until we take our final breath on this planet, we as human beings are capable of instituting dramatic changes in our lives. I actually believe that that is one of the greatest gifts given to mankind by God or whoever or whatever it is that you believe in. But at the end of the day, as adults, we are all accountable for our own actions. It wasn't a world tour, it wasn't a film role, and it wasn't a year off that was going to save the life of Elvis Presley. The only thing that was going to save the life of Elvis Presley was Elvis Presley himself. But unfortunately, that decision was never made, and on August 16th, 1977, Elvis Presley left the building permanently. But on his way out, he left us with a parting gift. And man, what a gift it was when he released his final album, Moody Blue, on June 19th, 1977. To me, this is one of Elvis Presley's greatest accomplishments, as I talked about on one of the videos in this channel in the past when I ranked his albums from the 1970s. This is my favorite era of Elvis Presley's career, and I do believe that Moody Blue is one of the greatest records that he ever made. This record was released on June 19th, 1977. Of course, it was produced wonderfully by Felton Jarvis, and one of the things that stands out most about this record, apart from just how incredible the songs are, is Elvis Presley's performance. This is one thing that I have talked about on this channel in the past, and it's something that all Elvis Presley fans all over the world talk about, and that is the fact that regardless of what he was going through or his, mental and physical state, the one thing that stood by Elvis throughout his entire life was his incredible voice. And I believe that in spite of everything that he was going through in terms of his addiction and his illnesses and his professional lethargy, Elvis never lost his passion for singing. He never lost his passion of music. He never lost his passion of performing live. Now, I would make the argument that, in 1975, 1976, and 1977, Elvis Presley wasn't necessarily in love with playing the third and fourth tier cities in the United States, playing cities like Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa for the 10th and 12th times ago. But I believe that even up until the very end, Elvis Presley felt most at home on stage. And even if you go back and you listen to those recordings from 1975, 76, and 77, including the Elvis in concert record and television special at the very end of his last tour, despite his appearance and despite the fact that he was clearly in declining health, his voice never left his side, and that is evident on this record. I think that this album has some of Elvis's best vocal performances of that era on both sides of this album, both the live side and the studio side. And it's funny, every year around August 16th, around the anniversary of his passing, this is the record that I sort of turn to when it comes to my Elvis Presley listening habits. It's a habit that I got into many years ago, and every time I listen to this record, especially around this time of year, around the anniversary of his passing, this record actually really kind of makes me sad for really a couple of reasons. One, because it's just so good. And two, of course it is his last album, but this album is so good it makes you sort of wonder where he was capable of going had he been able to sort of get his life and his addiction under control, which again, like I said before, sadly never happened. But this is a record that he released on June 19th, 1977, not too long before he passed away. And this is an album that, I've always really loved the artwork on. Now, a lot of Elvis Presley's albums in the 1970s, despite the fact that it is my favorite era and those are my favorite albums in his catalog, the album artwork wasn't necessarily always the most ambitious, but I've always really loved this album cover in particular. I love that picture of Elvis on the front. I sort of love that it's taken from a distance. I love the single stage light above him, and I really love the photograph on the back. Not that this picture, I don't believe that this picture was taken in 1977. I believe that this photograph on the back was taken in 1975, so it wasn't necessarily era accurate in 1977, but we're splitting hairs at that point in time. Of course, this album, when it was released in 1977, famously came out on this beautiful translucent blue vinyl. At the time, it was the first Elvis Presley official release to be printed, or pressed, I should say, on colored vinyl. The second pressing of this record actually came out in the traditional black vinyl, but after Elvis Presley passed away in 1977, the demand for this record went up because when this record was initially released in June of 1977, this record did not perform overly well commercially. Elvis Presley records weren't necessarily flying off the shelves at that point in time, so when they did the second pressing of this record, they decided to do it with the traditional black vinyl instead of the translucent blue vinyl. But in August of 1977, after Elvis passed away, the demand for this record and all of his records went to such a fevered pitch that they decided to go back and start repressing Moody Blue on the original translucent vinyl. So, ironically, if you have a copy of Moody Blue that is pressed on the traditional black vinyl, it is actually much more rare than the translucent blue. Now, I don't have a copy of the traditional black vinyl record. I actually sort of prefer the translucent blue anyway, just because it's so beautiful, and I'm a sucker for all of the sort of colored vinyl. But I've been going back and listening to this record a lot over the past week or so. Like I said, every year around Elvis's anniversary, this is the record that I'm really drawn to, and as much fun as it is to listen to because it's so good, I do always find this record to be just a little bit depressing. As I mentioned before, this record was beautifully produced by Felton Jarvis. The first track on this record is a live version of the song Unchained Melody, which was recorded on April 24th, 1977 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Of course, this song was originally written by Alex North and Hy Zarrett. And you talk about an album starter that basically just grabs you right by the seeds and sucks you in. You get a few notes into the first track on this album, and you know that you're going to sit there and listen to the whole record. I mean, this is a song, Unchained Melody, especially towards the last couple years of Elvis's life, that he was born to sing. This song was specifically written for Elvis Presley to sing. Nobody in the world has ever sung this song, Unchained Melody, like Elvis Presley did. To me, this is one of the best live versions of this song I've ever heard. Every time I go back and listen to concert tapes from 1975, 76, and 77, this is always one of the biggest highlights. I especially love the way in the Austin Butler Elvis movie, towards the end, where they portray this song Live on stage, of course, by that point in time, it's Elvis at the very end. He's overweight, he's unhealthy. But just this performance of this song, especially this one that is on the record, is one of the best performances of this song ever. Every time I listen to Elvis Presley sing Unchained Melody, it literally makes the hair on my body stand up all over the place. There was a single that was released of this song also that was a sort of an alternate version of this song that was recorded on June 21st, 1977 in Rapid City, South Dakota, which is almost as good, although I would take the Ann Arbor version of it just slightly above the Rapid City, South Dakota, recording. Although Rapid City, South Dakota, I have to tell you, is a place that I have been. And Rapid City, South Dakota is pretty snug, if you want my honest opinion. My wife and I, several years ago, I was living in Seattle, and back in those days, I was working at a place where I think it was monthly. Back in those days, we would always get a copy of Vice magazine, and Vice magazine was something that was a high point of my month every time it came out. I could not wait to get the new Vice and thumb through it. My favorite sort of feature in Vice magazine, of course, was the do's and don'ts, the fashion do's and don'ts. But I remember specifically one issue of Vice magazine back many years ago. There was an article that they had written. I think it was either the top 5 or top 10 most depressing theme parks in America. And I'll never forget that the number 1 most depressing theme park in America was this place called Bedrock City, which was in a town called Custer, South Dakota. Now, around 2015 or 2016, my wife and I were getting ready to move to Nashville for the first time. Now, we lived in Nashville for a year back in 2016, and it didn't really quite work out, so we left for a while before we ended up coming back in 2020. But as we were planning our trip from San Francisco to Nashville, my wife and I have moved cross-country many times, and we've driven across country many times. So every time we drive cross-country, we try to find sort of a different route. So there are things that we haven't seen before because, I love driving across the country. This is a big, beautiful country. There are just so many amazing things to see along the way. So my wife and I were planning our trip out to Nashville, and we decided that because we had never really gone up through the Dakotas, that I'd driven across North Dakota, but I'd never done South Dakota. And I told her about this article I read about this theme park. Now, I sort of became obsessed with this Bedrock City in Custer, South Dakota, ever since reading the article in Vice magazine talking about how it was the most depressing theme park in America. And so we called this place, Bedrock City in Custer, South Dakota, just to see if it was even still open. And we got somebody on the phone, and they told us that, yeah, we're still open, but this is our last summer. We're closing permanently after this summer. Now, we were getting pretty close to Labor Day, so that pretty much made the decision for me that en route to Nashville from San Francisco, that we were actually going to go out through Reno and then cut up into the Dakotas because I had to see this place, Bedrock City, for myself because it was something I had just become kind of obsessed with ever since reading about it. Not realizing that we were right there next to Mount Rushmore. Needless to say, that Bedrock City in Custer, South Dakota was the jugs. It was as depressing as you can possibly imagine, and we were actually there on the very last weekend, but Custer is right near Rapid City, South Dakota is the point that I'm trying to get to. So Rapid City is actually a very cool, beautiful city. They have a good food scene, a good beer scene, and you're right next to Mount Rushmore. But too bad, unfortunately, you can't go see Bedrock City anymore in Custer, South Dakota because it's gone now. It's, I think, just like a campground. But anyway, I really like the version of the song recorded on June 21st in South Dakota as well. But I would take the album track from Ann Arbor pretty much every day. That's the thing about this record too, Moody Blue, is of course it's basically the tale of two albums, right? Because the first side of this album is, it's 80% live, and the second side of this record is all studio. Now, I like all of the stuff on the live, on side A, on the live side of this record. I like all of it. I'm not complaining, but The stuff on side 2 is so good that, for me, every time I listen to this record, I sort of wish that side 1 was all studio originals like side 2, because if side 1 were all studio originals and as good as the stuff that's on side 2, this might actually be Elvis Presley's best album, which to me, his best album is always going to be 1969's From Elvis in Memphis. But I love Unchained Melody. The second song on this record is a live version, If You Love Me, Let Me Know. A song that was recorded on April 26th, 1977 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. A song written by John Rostill. And this is a song that was popularized in 1974 by Olivia Newton-John. Elvis Presley became a pretty big fan of Olivia Newton-John. He ended up doing a lot of the songs that she sort of popularized later on in his career. I really like the song If You Love Me, Let Me Know. On this record, on this particular album, it isn't necessarily the high point for me. I actually do kind of like the Olivia Newton-John version of it as well. I'm not a big Olivia Newton-John fan per se, but it's a good version of it. His performance of it is great. After that, he goes into a song called Little Darlin', which was recorded also live on April 24th, 1977 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A song that was written by Maurice Williams and popularized by the Diamonds in 1957. I love the Diamonds. I love the Diamonds version of this song. I am a huge, huge, huge doo-wop fan. As much as I like the old 50s rock and roll, rockabilly sound, man, if I had to take a choice, not counting Elvis, but if I had to make a choice, generically speaking, between doo-wop and rockabilly, not Elvis, but apart from that, I gotta go with doo-wop. I am a huge doo-wop fan. I love the Diamonds. I love their version of Little Darlin'. This is a good version of it. It's a very sort of true to the Diamonds version, live version of the song. It isn't the high point on this record. It might be the weakest song on this record, which is not to say that it's weak, because there's not a single bad song on all of Moody Blue, but the Diamonds version of Little Darlin' it's one of my favorite doo-wop songs of all time, so I like it. The fourth song on side 1 is the only studio album, or studio track, I should say, on the first side of the record. It is the song He'll Have to Go, written by Joe and Audrey Allison, a husband and wife songwriting duo that were based right here in Nashville, Tennessee. This song was popularized by Jim Reeves in 1959, and the story of this song is basically a man has his wife on the phone. They are in the middle of a conversation at which point he detects another man's voice in the background, and he becomes basically obsessed with it. And the story behind the song, which was written by a husband and wife duo, Joe and Audrey Allison, was that at one point in time, Joe and Audrey were on the phone together, and apparently Audrey was in sort of a crowded room, and her husband Joe was having a hard time hearing her on the phone, and because of all of this sort of white noise that was coming from her end of the line, he became convinced that there was another man in the room with her, and it ended up in sort of a quarrel. Of course, they were able to sort of, work out and talk through what happened and avoid any sort of major, marital malfunction. But that's the story behind the song, He'll Have to Go. I really like the song. It's kind of got a sort of blues, country, early rock and roll kind of vibe to it. It's down-tempo. I really love Elvis's voice on this song. I love his vocal performance. I mean, like I said before, the one thing you have to give Elvis credit for, whether you're a fan or not, and if you're not a fan, I have no idea what you are doing with your life, son. But you have to give Elvis credit for the fact that his voice just stayed with him, through thick and thin. This song was recorded at Graceland in his home studio in April of 1977. The last song on side one is a live version of the song Let Me Be There, another song that was written by John Rostill and popularized by Olivia Newton-John in 1973. Now, this song was recorded in Memphis in 1974 for the album that came out, for the live album that came out in 1974. And basically, this song is about, wherever you go, I'll be there. I'll be there next to you, basically, through thick and thin. I like this version. I like this version of the song. I actually don't really like the Olivia Newton-John version of this song. I actually just went back and listened to her version of this song a couple days ago as I was kind of writing these notes, and I don't really like her version of this song. I like her version of the song, If You Love Me, Let Me Know, but her version of the song is not really my luggage. I do love Elvis's version of this song. It's funny, if you go back, though, and you listen to this track, which was recorded in 1974, as opposed to the other tracks on the other live tracks on side one that were recorded in 1977. Like I said before, despite the fact that Elvis was in dire straits by this point in time, 1977, vocally he actually sounds better, I think, on the later tracks than he does on this one. Of the live tracks on this album, this is the one that I would say that Elvis, although he sounds great, I would say he doesn't sound quite as good as he does on the ones from 1977. But that's the song that closes out side one. And now we get into side two, which to me is arguably one of the best sides that Elvis ever released. And like I said before, if side one of Moody Blue were all sort of studio originals like side two is, this might actually be his best record. Side one starts off, of course, with the monstrous Way Down, which is still one of my, this might be a top 10 all-time favorite Elvis song as far as I'm concerned. This is a song that I never get tired of. I don't care how many times I've heard it. This song was recorded on October 29th, 1976, written by Lang Martin Jr. This was, of course, the last single that he ever released before he passed away. This was basically his last hit while he was still alive. This is a very sort of sultry, sexy love song. There is a lyric in this song that sort of based on the way that Elvis passed away and the fact that he passed away not too long after this song was recorded, that's always sort of set weird with me. And that is the lyric where he says, "The medicine within me, no doctor could prescribe." And something about that based on the fact that he was a pharmaceutical addict. It's an interesting choice of lyrics for Elvis to record. It always sits a little bit sort of wonky with me based on his addiction, but apart from that, Way Down is, it's basically a perfect song. I love his voice on this song. It is just beautiful. The second song on this album, or side two, is a song Pledging My Love, which was also recorded on October 29th, 1976. The fact that these two songs were recorded on the same day just absolutely baffles me, because Way Down and Pledging My Love are two of Elvis's best later songs. This song was written by Don Roby and Ferdinand Washington. Kind of wish that my name was Ferdinand Washington. I feel like my life may have turned out differently had I been named Ferdinand Washington. This song was originally popularized by Johnny Ace as an early rock and roll song in 1954. This one has a real, Elvis's version of it has, again, that real sort of early rock and roll doo-wop kind of vibe that I love. Not only do I love Elvis's vocal performance on this song, I love the instrumental track. Way Down is probably my favorite instrumental track on this record, but Pledging My Love is not too far behind it, because it's got like a real cool, authentic, vintage, swanky doo-wop kind of backbeat. And Elvis's voice is just insane on this song. If you haven't gone back and heard the Johnny Ace version from 1954, I would highly recommend it. That song is just awesome. I think sometimes, you know, some of these songs, especially with Elvis, right? Because Elvis was Elvis, and he could basically pick songs that he wanted to do at will. I mean, it was very rare that somebody turned down Elvis Presley to record one of their songs. Of course, there's the famous story of Dolly Parton sort of turning down Elvis when it came to Elvis wanting to record her song that Whitney Houston popularized. But it was very rare that somebody would turn down Elvis. So, you know, like I said, go back and listen to the Johnny Ace song from 1954. The song is just immaculate. I mean, basically every version of this song is great, but Elvis's version is probably my favorite, Pledging My Love. After that is the title track, Moody Blue, written by Mark James, who also famously wrote Suspicious Minds. This one and Suspicious Minds, to me, are actually two songs that sort of, you know, kind of remind me of each other in terms of instrumental track and tempo. And even though the lyrical, or the lyrical content, or the subject matter, I should say, is very different from one another, these two songs really remind me of each other. This song was recorded on February 4th, 1976 at Elvis's home studio in Graceland. And I think this song is sort of about the unpredictable nature of, I don't want to say women, because that sounds not quite right, but the unpredictable nature of this particular woman, because you get the feeling then that the character in this song is dealing with a fair amount of frustration, because every time he feels as if he gets to know this woman, she, you know, throws him a curveball. She changes her mind about something, and it sort of reminds me of my relationship with my wife. And I guess it's just relationships in general. If you've been with somebody as long as my wife and I have been together, you know, people change, people evolve, people change their minds about things. That is acceptable, but my wife has a tendency to really just do a U-turn on you out of nowhere. I mean, there's been times where I felt as if her and I were in agreement on a topic, and I will sort of continue living my life as if we are in agreement on this topic, and a week or a month or a year later, I will sort of casually bring it up in conversation, and she will tell me basically, you know, bluntly, with, you know, no second thought, that no, that's not the way things are. I remember many years ago, this is just one example, my wife and I were living in the Bay Area, up in the San Francisco area, and we thought for a minute that we were thinking about moving to LA. Because LA is a place that I like. LA is a place that my wife likes. And, you know, San Francisco was just becoming sort of expensive. And, you know, I didn't love my job at the time, which is something that I've been known to do. If I don't necessarily love my job, I've been known to sort of, you know, pack up our uproot our lives and, you know, move on down the road. So we were talking about moving to LA. And I remember I mentioned it to her casually. Now, we hadn't made any plans. It wasn't like we had decided we were going to do this, but I mentioned something very casually in passing about the idea of moving to LA. And she let me know in no uncertain terms that we weren't moving to LA. She's like, "What are you talking about? LA? What in the hell is wrong with you?" And I remember being very confused and telling her, I was like, "Well, we were just talking about this like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago." She's like, "I'm not moving to LA. I don't know what the hell you're talking about." It was something I thought that we were in agreement with, or agreement about, before that. Apparently, she had changed her mind, and I was just sort of still trucking along in the slow lane, thinking that it was a possibility. But it always reminds me of the song Moody Blue. And again, I talk about this with all of the songs on this record. This is another one of those songs that is just basically a perfect Elvis song. I mean, there is not one song on this entire album, either side, the live side or the studio side, that is at all skippage, in my opinion. I've been listening to this record in heavy rotation over the last few days, and there is not one song on this album that I even think about skipping, especially Moody Blue. Way Down is probably my favorite song on this record, as generic as that sounds, but Moody Blue might be second. It's tough. It's right up there. Second favorite song on this album is tough. Way Down is my favorite. The fourth song on side one is a song called She Thinks I Still Care, written by Dickie Lee. Now, Dickie Lee, of course, was a Memphis-based songwriter he was from Memphis, and eventually he ended up living out here in Nashville. Now, back in his earlier career, Dickie Lee was a recording artist himself, and actually, I am a huge fan of the old Dickie Lee records. Now, they aren't necessarily for everybody. Dickie Lee had a very sort of unique voice. In fact, I've heard a lot of people say that they really had an issue with his voice. I make the sort of analogy, and this may be kind of a crude analogy, but I always tell people that Dickie Lee was sort of the early rock and roll equivalent to Geddy Lee from Rush. Now, I'm not necessarily the biggest Rush fan, but in general, anyway, but I make the same complaint that a lot of people who are Rush detractors make, is like, instrumentally, it's okay. I tend to come from more of a punk rock background, so I don't necessarily get, the whole prog rock, prog metal thing. That's sort of the antithesis of my punk rock world. So I'm not necessarily the biggest Rush fan anyway, but even on the songs of theirs that I like instrumentally, it is that voice that I can take in very small doses. And I've heard people say the same thing about Dickie Lee, but personally speaking, I am a huge, huge fan of Dickie Lee's old records. Now, Dickie Lee eventually would end up moving to Nashville and became more famous as a songwriter. This song was recorded on February 2nd, 1976. Of course, this song was most popularized by George Jones in 1962, which was the first version of this song that I ever heard. And I remember specifically that the first time I ever heard this song was in the movie Swingers. And there's that scene where the two main characters are driving from LA to Las Vegas, and this is the soundtrack as they are making that trip. And there's just something about that, the use of that song in that scene, that is perfect. Now, I've said this in the past on this channel. When I ranked the studio albums of Elvis from the 1970s, I made this comment, which is why I sort of ranked Elvis's country album a little bit lower on that list of albums. I'm not really the biggest country music guy in the world. I really never have been, but I love George Jones. George Jones might be my favorite country singer of all time, unless you count Johnny Cash, who it'd probably be neck and neck between George Jones and Johnny Cash. I realize how generic that sounds, but I'm not really the biggest country music guy. If you ever get a chance, though, and you haven't been to Nashville, and I'm not assuming that you haven't been to Nashville, but if you ever get a chance to come down here to Nashville, and you haven't, one thing I highly recommend is that you go seek out the grave of George Jones, because it is as Nashville tacky as it gets. It is the ultimate rhinestone cowboy shrine. It is probably the greatest tomb that I have ever seen in my entire life. And there are a few other country music stars in the cemetery that George Jones is buried in. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but the same day we went to go visit George Jones is who I went to visit specifically, because he is my favorite, or one of my favorite country music singers. We also found Tammy Wynette, Little Jimmy Dickens, Porter Wagner, a few other guys that we found there were all buried there. But George Jones's grave is the stuff of legends. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Apart from George Jones recording this song in 1962 and Elvis in 1976, this is a song that's basically been recorded by everybody. Just to name a few, you've got Del Shannon, the Ripcords, Bill Haley in the Comets, Cher, Merle Haggard, John Fogerty, Michael Nesmith from the Monkees, Leon Russell, and my personal favorite, apart from George Jones and Elvis's version, which are my top two favorites, is the version recorded by Kirsty MacColl, who gained notoriety with her work with the Pogues on their Christmas classic Fairy Tale of New York. Go back and listen to Kirsty MacColl sing She Thinks I Still Care. It is the jugs. Kirsty MacColl had one of the most beautiful voices that I've ever heard. I mean, you'd have to be like Satan not to acknowledge that. Again, this is one of my favorite songs on the record. My favorite version of the song is George Jones in 1962. The last song on this record is a song called It's Easy for You, written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and recorded by Elvis on October 29th, 1976. I think the theme of this song basically is, you're going through a breakup with somebody that you've been with for a very long time, and naturally you are sort of having a hard time with it. You are struggling. You're not finding it easy to get your feet back underneath you, and you look over at what your former partner, or whatever you want to call it, is, how they're conducting their lives, and they're out, they're mingling, they're hanging out with friends, they're meeting people, they're dating, maybe they're hooking up with others, and you think to yourself, why is this so easy for you? I'm dying here. I'm dying. And you're out there making this look easy? That's not fair. I don't appreciate it. I think the song makes you feel as if you were a little bit more invested in this relationship than the former person was. I get the sense that this person is the breakee, not the breaker. I feel as if the breaker is out there sort of getting on with their lives, and this person is still sort of mired in a little bit of their sort of emotional sludge. This vocal performance by Elvis is big, it's epic, it's beautiful, and if you're going to leave the building prematurely at the age of 42, which Elvis Presley unfortunately did on August 16th, 1977, and this is your last studio track off of your last album you released while you were still on this planet, this, I think, is a pretty good choice, because Elvis's performance is just monstrous. As I said before, say it again. I'll probably say it again tomorrow when nobody else is listening. Not that anybody's listening now, mind you. But the one thing that never left Elvis was that voice. And the song It's Easy for You is so much evidence of that. It is one of Elvis's best vocal performances in the 1970s, and as I said before, if side one of this record were as good as side two, not saying that it isn't good, but if it were studio originals like side two, I think you're looking at Elvis Presley's best, maybe best all-time album, but certainly best album from the 1970s. So if you haven't gone back and listened to Moody Blue recently, I highly recommend it. Like I said, this is a record that I've been listening to over the past few days. I'm probably going to put it away for a little while, because when I do listen to this record as a huge, diehard, lifelong Elvis fan, it makes me a little bit emotional, because this is it. This was the last record, and it's so good that you can't help but sort of hunger for what could have been coming down the pipe had Elvis managed to sort of get himself under control. So anyway, rest in peace, Elvis. I love you. I miss you. And your legacy lives on through not only your music, but the fans who just love you so much. So rest in peace. My wife and I are actually getting ready to head out to Memphis later today. From out here in Nashville, we are heading out to Memphis for the big Sierra Farrell show tonight at Overton Park. Now, I got to be honest with you. I tell you, that Sierra Farrell isn't necessarily my luggage. She's one of my wife's probably top 5 favorite artists of all time. But I will go and I will put on a smile because I love Memphis. And I will never pass up an opportunity to go hang out in Memphis, even if it's for a show that I'm not, necessarily super excited about. But we're going to be out there all weekend. Man, I love going to Memphis. It is really my happy place based on my love of Elvis Presley, my love of rock and roll. If you are a music or rock and roll fan, I mean, Memphis is, it's like the holy ground. It's like the Holy Land if you're a fan of rock and roll. So we're going to be out there all weekend. Hopefully on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, my wife will be on the channel with me as we go through and sort of do a Sierra Farrell show recap. She knows a lot more about Sierra Farrell than I do, but I am so excited to be heading out to Memphis in just a few minutes. It's funny when you live out here in Nashville, because I love Memphis, and Memphis is literally one of my favorite cities, and it's a very sentimental city to me in a lot of ways, but it's funny when you live out here in Nashville, because Memphis and Nashville are only about 2.5, maybe 3 hours apart, depending on how you drive. But you'd be really hard-pressed to find two cities that are more different than one another. And living on this side of it out here in Nashville is sort of funny because people in Nashville have a tendency to sort of look down their nose on Memphis, because Memphis is sort of like your sort of dysfunctional, younger cousin, right? They're the ones that are sort of having a hard time getting their lives together. Maybe they didn't come up in as affluent or, sort of pampered setting as you did. They struggle a little bit more. And people in Nashville have a tendency to sort of be snobby or dismissive when it comes to discussing, Memphis. So I've been telling people over the past week, I'm going out to Memphis this weekend. I'm excited. I love it. I can't wait to go. And everybody always sort of gives you that like Nashville side eye when you tell them you're going to Memphis. But we're going to be out there all weekend. Hopefully we will have time to drive by the big house, which I'm sure we will. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And one more time, just let me say rest in peace to the king of rock and roll, Mr. Elvis Aaron Presley. 47 years as of August 16th. It is hard to believe that Elvis has almost been gone for half a century. Fortunately for us and the world, he left behind a legacy of records that will live on forever. I mean, the guy is immortal. With every generation of young people coming up, he cultivates new young fans. This is somebody that will live forever and is as relevant today as he ever was. So rest in peace, Elvis. I love you. I can't wait to talk more about your records on an episode coming up in the semi-near future. Apart from that, I think we're done here, son. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.